The helicopter blades tore through the thin alpine air, scattering dust and pine needles over the ridgeline. Below, the August sun was already sinking behind the serrated peaks of Rocky Mountain National Park, painting the granite walls in bruised orange light. From above, the wilderness looked endless, valleys folding into valleys, forests sinking into shadow. To rescuers scanning the slopes, it was both beautiful and unforgiving. They had been searching for days, combing ridges, cirques, and tree leans for a young man named Blake Kieckhafer, last seen nearly a week earlier. 23 years old, a quiet kid from Omaha, Nebraska. He'd come to the mountains alone. When a glint caught the eye of one spotter above Emerald Lake, the crew didn't speak at first. It was small, metallic, barely visible between the boulders. The helicopter tilted, circled back. Then they saw it, a shape lying motionless against the stone. As the crew touched down, the stillness of the mountain swallowed the roar of the rotor blades. The search that had stretched across miles of terrain had found its ending, not the one anyone had prayed for, but an ending nonetheless. That day, August 13th, 2025, the body recovered above Emerald Lake was confirmed to be Blake Kieckhafer. The official report from the Larimer County coroner would later list the cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries from an accidental fall. But beneath those words was a human story, one that began not in tragedy, but in quiet determination and the restless pull of the wilderness. Blake wasn't famous. He wasn't reckless. He was simply drawn to the outdoors, to the kind of vast, untamed silence that makes a person feel both small and alive. Friends said he was thoughtful, curious, sometimes introspective to the point of disappearing into his own world. In early August, he'd left Nebraska for Colorado, telling family he wanted to clear his head and hike for a few days before deciding what came next in life. He arrived in Estes Park, the mountain gateway to Rocky Mountain National Park. Cameras caught him buying a day pass, a small white ticket tucked under his windshield wiper. He texted a few friends that he'd made it safely. There was no sign of distress, no hint that this trip would end any differently than 100 other solo hikes before it. On August 7th at 5:20 p.m., a rideshare driver dropped him off near Upper Beaver Meadows, a rolling stretch of grassland and pines beneath the towering profile of Long's Peak. The driver would later recall that Blake was polite, calm, and traveling light. A dark shirt, dark pants, baseball cap, and a maroon day pack. He said he wanted to hike before sunset. That was the last verified sighting. By the time the park gates closed that night, the mountain had swallowed him. At first, there was no reason to worry. Visitors vanished into the wilderness for hours or even days all the time. A wrong turn, a dead phone battery, a decision to camp off trail. But as the days passed and Blake's car remained untouched, unease spread. His family called, texted, emailed, nothing. On August 11th, they reported him missing. Within hours, the National Park Service launched a coordinated search. Dozens of rangers, ground teams, and search dogs fanned out across the rugged alpine terrain. Helicopters traced the ridgelines from dawn to dusk. Yet every lead ended in silence. No footprints, no clothing, no trace. The park's beauty can be deceptive. From the ground, Rocky Mountain National Park is postcard perfect. Emerald lakes, sun-drenched meadows, snow still clinging to high peaks. But just beyond the tourist trails, the landscape turns brutal. Loose scree, sudden drop-offs. Whether that shifts from calm to lethal in minutes. Every step can be a decision between safety and disaster. For the rescuers, that awareness sharpened with each day Blake remained missing. They searched not only for a hiker, but for answers. What brought him here? Why this trail, this hour, this mountain? Those questions would echo through the alpine canyons long after the helicopter lifted his body away. Because for those who loved him, it wasn't enough to know how he died. They needed to understand why he'd gone into the wilderness at all, and what he might have been seeking in its silence. As the coroner's report made its way through official channels, the story spread. Local news, then national. Young man vanishes after rideshare drop-off in Colorado Park. The headline fed the public's imagination. Another case in the growing archive of American wilderness disappearances. But for his family, the story was personal. His mother described Blake as gentle and curious. His friends remembered him as the kind of person who noticed small things, the way sunlight hit the pavement after rain or the quiet rhythm of a long drive. When the Park Service announced that the cause of death was an accidental fall, it closed one chapter but left another wide open. Between the moment he stepped out of that car and the moment he fell, there were nearly 2 days unaccounted for. 2 days of movement no one could retrace. The wilderness keeps its secrets well. In the stillness above Emerald Lake, surrounded by the wind and the whisper of pines, rescuers paused for a moment of silence before lifting him from a rock. For them, it was not just another recovery. It was a reminder that even in a world mapped by satellites and signal towers, there are still places that hold people in their arms and do not let go. Blake Kieckhafer's story is not one of mystery for mystery's sake. It is one of human fragility, of solitude and wonder, and of how thin the line can be between adventure and tragedy. In the days that followed, the sky over the Rockies stayed clear. The tourists returned. The meadows swayed. The park went on, indifferent yet eternal. And somewhere between the grand and the clouds, a young man's final steps joined the long, silent roll call of those who came seeking peace, and found something far greater and far more final. When Blake Kieckhafer left Omaha, Nebraska, the world around him was ordinary. Paved streets, steady routines, familiar sounds. He packed light. A few changes of clothes, hiking shoes, his phone, and a small maroon day pack that he always carried on weekend trips. To friends, it looked like another short getaway. But for Blake, it seemed to mean something deeper, a quiet reset, a chance to clear his head in the open air. He had been restless that summer. People close to him described him as thoughtful, sometimes distant, the kind of person who thought too much about what came next. He wasn't running from anyone or anything, just searching for stillness in a world that rarely offered it. For Blake, the mountains were that stillness, the hum of wind through the pines, the sharp scent of rain on granite. It was the only kind of peace that made sense. On the morning of August 7th, 2025, he checked into a budget motel near Estes Park. The drive from Omaha to northern Colorado had taken him most of the day before. At a local O'Reilly Auto Parts, he bought a small item, likely something simple, maybe for his car. Security footage later confirmed he was calm, polite, soft-spoken. He smiled at the cashier. Then he drove toward Rocky Mountain National Park and parked near the Beaver Meadows entrance. He purchased a day pass, tucking it under his windshield before locking the car. At 5:20 p.m., a rideshare driver picked him up near the entrance. According to that driver, Blake wanted to be dropped off in the Upper Beaver Meadows area, a quiet valley where the trail system connects to several high country routes, including the path toward Emerald Lake. It's a spot that looks serene, but rises quickly into rugged terrain. He didn't carry heavy camping gear, just a small backpack, no sleeping bag, no tent. That detail later puzzled investigators. It suggested he hadn't planned to spend the night, or at least not far from civilization. Perhaps he only wanted to hike until dusk, then return. The park was still alive with summer light, golden and endless. The ridgelines shimmered in the evening haze. It was a perfect day to wander, and an easy one to get lost in. When he stepped out of the car, the driver watched him walk toward the trailhead and disappear among the trees. That image, small, unhurried, a lone figure fading into green, would become the last living trace of him. Hours passed. Night fell. The park gates closed. No one knew it yet, but those first 24 hours would mark the beginning of a massive search effort that would stretch across days and miles of wilderness. But in that first moment, the end of daylight on August 7th, there was only silence. The next morning, visitors came and went through Beaver Meadows as usual. Hikers checked in. Families picnicked. Photographers lined the meadows for sunrise shots of Long's Peak. Somewhere beyond their view, Blake was out there, alive perhaps, but unreachable. By August 9th, when the coroner would later estimate the fall occurred, weather in the upper elevations had shifted. Afternoon storms rolled across the high country, the kind that turn dry rock slick and make footing treacherous. Visibility drops. Trails vanish into fog. If Blake had climbed higher than planned, the conditions could have turned against him in seconds. A misplaced step, a loose edge, a moment's distraction. In that landscape, A mistake is often final. It wasn't until August 11th that alarm began to build. His family hadn't heard from him in days. His phone silent. No social media activity. No calls. No texts. They contacted park authorities and filed a missing persons report. The National Park Service responded immediately. Within hours, the first search teams mobilized. The goal wasn't just to find a body. At that point, there was still hope he might be injured or disoriented, sheltering somewhere off-trail. The terrain was unforgiving, but in summer, survival for several days was possible. That slim hope kept the rescuers moving. They began with the most logical routes, the trails branching out from Upper Beaver Meadows, following the natural valleys that funnel hikers toward Dream Lake, Emerald Lake, and the Continental Divide. Helicopters scanned the ridgelines with thermal imaging. Ground teams followed drainage paths and creek beds where an injured hiker might have sought water. More than 80 people joined the search, including Arapahoe Rescue Patrol, Larimer County SAR, Park Service Rangers, and multiple K-9 units trained in alpine tracking. They covered terrain from early morning to late evening, climbing as high as 10,000 feet, where air thins and fatigue sets in fast. Day after day, they returned empty-handed. No trail markers disturbed, no footprints beyond the usual. The wilderness felt as if it had simply swallowed him whole. But something about this case felt different. It wasn't just the disappearance itself. It was the normalcy of the circumstances. No sign of distress, no bad weather to start, no record of miscommunication. He had just vanished after stepping out of a rideshare. For investigators, that fact stood out. There were no companions, no gear to trace, no itinerary left behind. The story was both simple and deeply haunting. A young man entering one of the most beautiful places on Earth and never walking back out. By the end of the fourth day, search teams began widening their perimeter toward Emerald Lake, a high-altitude basin surrounded by sheer cliffs and steep talus slopes. It's a breathtaking place, turquoise waters beneath jagged spires, but also deadly terrain for the unprepared. That's where the helicopter crew eventually spotted something, a glint of metal. When they descended and confirmed it was him, the mood on-site shifted from tense urgency to quiet sorrow. For rescuers, every mission carries a balance between hope and realism. By that point, they had known what they might find. Still, confirmation always hits like a blow. The coroner later concluded that Blake had fallen, likely a misstep on slick rock or an unstable ledge. The injuries were consistent with a high-elevation fall, not foul play. His death, the report said, was accidental. But an accident doesn't erase a story. In the wake of his recovery, tributes began appearing online, small messages from friends and strangers alike. Some had never met him but felt moved by the quiet tragedy of his journey. Others, who had known him personally, spoke of a gentle young man who found beauty in solitude. In the heart of that vast park, surrounded by towering peaks and eternal silence, his final steps became part of a much older human story, one about awe, risk, and a fragile thread between man and nature. The search ended. The paperwork followed. The official press release was brief. Just a few sentences noting that a missing hiker had been found, that the investigation was complete, and that the family had been notified. But behind those sterile lines lay days of effort, sleepless nights, and a shared ache among all who'd looked for him. The mountains had given no explanation. They never do. They simply waited, as they always have, vast and silent, while people below tried to make sense of why someone like Blake, young, kind, full of quiet intention, would go seeking peace and find tragedy instead. The first thing rescuers remember about that week wasn't the noise. It was the silence. Rocky Mountain National Park is rarely still. In summer, the air carries a chorus of footsteps, cameras clicking, the laughter of hikers climbing toward thin air. But when a search begins, that soundscape changes. Helicopters echo through canyons. Radios crackle. And then, when the engines die, the silence returns, vast, heavy, endless. That silence was what the teams walked into when the call went out. A 23-year-old male, last seen Thursday evening, Upper Beaver Meadows. No follow-up contact. No itinerary. The kind of case that could go either way, a rescue or recovery. Search and rescue in the high Rockies is never simple. The park spans more than 415 square miles, cut by steep valleys, glacial cirques, and ridgelines that climb above 12,000 feet. Even with GPS, the terrain eats time. A mile on paper can take an hour on foot. The air thins, storms arrive without warning, and visibility can vanish in seconds. On August 11th, teams assembled at dawn near the Beaver Meadows Visitor Center. Park rangers laid out maps across a folding table, tracing the most likely routes Blake could have taken. Trails toward Dream Lake, Emerald Lake, and the Glacier Gorge area. They assigned zones, reviewed safety protocols, and began moving out in pairs. Each carried what every searcher carries: radio, topographic map, extra food, and the quiet knowledge that not every story ends with a rescue. The first 24 hours are the window that defines everything. After that, survival odds drop sharply. But in summer, with mild nights and water sources nearby, there was reason to hope. That hope was what his family clung to. In Omaha, the Kieckhafer household became command central. Phones rang around the clock. Friends coordinated with park officials. Volunteers offered to fly out. Blake's mother described those days later as a blur, like the air itself was vibrating with worry. She had always trusted Blake's judgment. He wasn't reckless. He planned trips carefully, told someone where he was going, carried the essentials. But this time was different. He'd been quiet before leaving, introspective. She thought he just needed space, a few days away from screens, from noise. She couldn't have known that silence would grow into absence. By August 12th, the search had expanded to include K-9 units and aerial sweeps. Helicopters circled the ridges, scanning for any break in the landscape. A scrap of fabric, a footprint in mud, a reflection off metal. But from above, the wilderness was deceptive. Every boulder looked like a backpack, every shadow like a body. On the ground, searchers moved methodically. They followed drainage paths, checked creeks and gullies, shouted his name into the wind. They marked each pass with flagging tape and GPS coordinates. Nothing. By that evening, the mountains turned against them. Thunder rolled across the divide. Rain slicked the granite slopes and filled the creeks with ice-cold runoff. Visibility dropped to 50 feet. Teams pulled back, drenched and exhausted. The next morning, they went back out. One ranger described it later as searching for a whisper in a hurricane. The terrain was too vast, the clues too few. All they had was a point of last contact, that drop-off in Upper Beaver Meadows, and the possibility that Blake had followed one of the unofficial routes toward higher ground. Emerald Lake became the focus. It's one of the park's crown jewels, a basin carved by glaciers, ringed by sheer cliffs and jagged ridges. From a distance, it looks like paradise. Up close, it's treacherous. Loose rock, sudden ledges, narrow paths that vanish into snowfields even in August. Hikers underestimate it every year. By the afternoon of August 13th, fatigue was showing. Crews had covered miles of terrain without a single lead. The helicopters made one final sweep before refueling. And that's when one of the spotters saw it. Something metallic glinting in the sun near a steep slope above the lake. The pilot circled back. The glint was faint, but unnatural. The crew made the call. Within minutes, they'd located a body lying against a rock face, motionless, partly obscured by debris. The mountain went silent again. When the helicopter landed nearby, the team moved with practiced restraint. They confirmed what everyone already feared. The recovery took hours, requiring precision and care. Each movement was deliberate. A human life, no matter how still, deserved dignity. The Larimer County Coroner's office later confirmed that the remains belonged to Blake Kieckhafer. His injuries told the story. A high fall, consistent with a slip from an exposed ledge. No signs of foul play. No struggle. Just a moment of misjudgment in a place that allows none. When the news reached his family, the world seemed to stop. His mother said the hardest part wasn't knowing he was gone. It was knowing how peaceful the landscape had looked while holding him in silence. For the rescuers, the sense of loss was shared. They'd carried his photo in their pockets for days, studied it, imagined his route, called his name into canyons that swallowed sound. They weren't strangers anymore. They'd known his face, his story, his hope to find peace in the mountains. Now, they stood on the ridge, watching the helicopter lift away, its blades beating against the thin air, carrying him home. The wilderness remained unchanged. Clouds drifted. The lake shimmered below. Nothing in nature shifted to mark the event. No wind, no echo, no acknowledgement. Only the human heart registered what had happened here. The official report would later describe it in a single line. The cause of death is multiple blunt force injuries due to an accidental fall. Manner, accident. But between those sterile words lived everything that mattered. A life of curiosity, a search for meaning, and a deep human longing to find solace and beauty, even at its most unforgiving edge. In the following days, tributes poured in across social media. Friends shared photos of Blake smiling on past hikes, standing at overlooks with arms wide to sky. Words like kind, gentle, and thoughtful appeared again and again. Some said they envied his courage, that he'd gone somewhere pure, even if it took him from them. For many who followed his story, Blake's disappearance became something larger, a mirror reflecting how fragile the line is between adventure and eternity. The mountain had taken him, yes, but in a way, it had also given him back, not just a memory, but to a wider understanding of what draws people into the wild, that need for silence, that hunger for peace, that invisible invitation that whispers, "Come see what the world looks like without noise." For those who search, those who grieve, and those who walk the same trails now with heavier hearts, that whisper remains. And as long as people venture into places like Emerald Lake, they will carry Blake's story with them. A quiet reminder that beauty can be both breathtaking and fatal, and that sometimes the wilderness doesn't take people away. It simply keeps them. The news of the discovery broke quietly. A short press release from the National Park Service appeared online just after noon on August 14, 2025. It was brief, almost clinical, the kind of statement the public scrolls past on their way to more urgent headlines. The body recovered above Emerald Lake on August 13th has been positively identified as 23-year-old Blake Kieckhafer of Omaha, Nebraska. The cause of death has been determined as multiple blunt force injuries consistent with a fall. The manner of death is accidental. For most readers, it ended there. Another hiker lost in a national park. A statistic, one among dozens each year. But for those who had watched the story unfold, for those who had searched the ridgelines or waited by the phone, it wasn't a statistic. It was a silence that now had a name. In Omaha, candles burned late into the night. Friends gathered in small groups, some in living rooms, others on the riverfront, speaking softly, replaying old memories like prayer. His mother kept a photo of him from his high school graduation on the kitchen counter. The frame tilted just slightly toward the light. Blake wasn't lost, she said quietly to a local reporter. He knew where he was going. The mountain just didn't let him come back. It's difficult to explain that kind of loss, when a loved one disappears not into violence, but into nature. There's no one to blame, no justice to seek. Only questions that return like waves. What did he see in those final moments? Did he fall suddenly or sit for a while, watching the sky turn? Did he feel fear or peace? For investigators, the answers would remain unknowable. The Larimer County Coroner's Office released its final findings on August 19th. Cause of death, multiple blunt force injuries. Manner, accident. Estimated time of incident, around August 9th, 2025. The evidence was straightforward. There are no defensive wounds, no signs of foul play. The conclusion was clean, rational, and for the family, utterly hollow. Because what remains after a tragedy like this isn't mystery. It's absence. In the weeks that followed, the story spread across the nation. Major outlets picked it up: People Magazine, ABC News, The Independent, the Denver Gazette. Each headline followed the same rhythm. Young man vanishes after rideshare drop-off in Colorado Park. The words painted a haunting picture of modern solitude. A phone, a car app, a one-way trip into silence. Online, readers were transfixed. The comments filled with sympathy, then with theories, then with questions about what drives people to hike alone. Some cited spiritual reasons. Others spoke of mental clarity. Some simply said, "He wanted to feel alive." But beneath the noise, the truth was simpler. Blake wasn't chasing death or escape. He was chasing perspective, something so many people lose without even realizing it. Those who knew him best described him as introspective, patient, deeply observant, the kind of person who noticed everything but never made about himself. The mountains were his refuge, not his rebellion. In the days after the coroner's report, park rangers hiked back to the site, not to investigate, but to pay quiet respect. They left a small marker at a safe distance from where he'd been found. Nothing permanent, just a rock cairn, a stack of stones balanced one atop another. In the backcountry, such cairns serve as both guide and memorial. They say, someone walked here and someone remembered. At home, his mother received his belongings, the backpack, the hat, the few things recovered intact. She didn't open them right away. Weeks later, she did. Inside were small traces of an ordinary day, a water bottle, a notebook, a few granola wrappers. The kind of details that remind you how human a person was in the hours before the unthinkable. For many families of those lost in the wilderness, closure comes in degrees. Some never find remains at all. For Blake's family, that recovery, though painful, was a kind of mercy. It meant they could bring him home. It meant they could speak of him in the past tense without feeling like a betrayal. But the emotional echo lingered. Search and rescue teams returned to routine patrols. Tourists hiked the same trails, took photos by the same lake. Yet for those who had been part of the operation, Blake's story stayed with them. Rangers described it as the kind of case that humbles you, because the wilderness, for all its grandeur, holds no malice. It doesn't choose victims or play favorites. It simply is vast, indifferent, ancient. And sometimes, when human intention meets that indifference, the result is tragedy. His case began appearing in online discussions about wilderness safety and solo hiking. Commenters debated what could have gone wrong: a misstep, dehydration, confusion from altitude. Each theory ended the same way: speculation shadowed by sadness. By early September, as the season turned and the park grew quieter, a small memorial hike was held in his honor. A group of friends and family retraced the same trail he likely took from the Beaver Meadows entrance toward Dream Lake. They carried flowers and left them near the overlook facing Long's Peak. The air was thin and still. Somewhere far above, snow lingered on the cliffs. When they finished, they stood in silence, watching clouds drift across a ridgeline. One of Blake's closest friends spoke softly. He wasn't lost in the mountains. He found what he was looking for. We're just the ones left to miss him. The word stayed with them. In the months that followed, his story faded from headlines, but not from memory. People continued to share it online, pairing his photo with reminders to tell someone where you're hiking or don't underestimate the terrain. His name became a quiet warning and a gentle tribute. For every national park death that makes the news, there are hundreds that pass quietly. But Blake's story stood out, not because of the mystery, but because of its clarity. It wasn't crime or conspiracy that took him. It was the same force that draws so many people to wilderness in the first place. There's a paradox in that truth. That beauty can coexist with danger, that peace can end in silence. Yet within that paradox lies something profoundly human. The park is still there. The meadows still ripple in the wind. The ridges still glow pink at dusk. But for those who know his story, those places look different now, as the air itself carries a memory. Nature doesn't keep names. It doesn't build monuments. It lets the living do that. And through their words, their hikes, their quiet act of remembrance, Blake's story continues. Not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to wonder, to solitude, to the risk of reaching for something greater than ourselves. Because sometimes the people who step into the wilderness aren't lost. They're simply walking where the rest of us are afraid to look. By late summer 2025, Rocky Mountain National Park had returned to its usual rhythm. Elk wandered the meadows. Tour buses rolled through Estes Park. At first glance, nothing in the landscape hinted that a young man had died there only weeks before. Yet inside online communities, the story of Blake Kieckhafer was still echoing. A small tragedy amplified by the vastness of the wilderness that had claimed him. National parks occupy a strange place in the American imagination. They are sanctuaries and testing grounds at once, places where people go to find peace, to photograph beauty, to measure themselves against silence. Each year, nearly 300 million people enter these protected spaces. A few hundred never return. Some are found within hours. Others vanish entirely. When news outlets published Blake's photo, a smiling, fair-haired 23-year-old looking directly into the camera, readers saw more than a missing hiker. They saw a reflection of themselves or someone they loved, a weekend traveler, a curious soul who trusted the trail. His story became part of a pattern people were already primed to notice. For years, documentaries, podcasts, and YouTube channels had explored the phenomenon of people disappearing in national parks, a haunting catalog of names and coordinates. The stories all share the same elements: isolation, beauty, unanswered questions. But Blake's case was different because it had closure. There was no conspiracy, no lingering suspicion of foul play. His death was simple, almost too ordinary for headlines, and that ordinariness made it feel intimate, real, and deeply human. Across Reddit threads and hiking forums, people debated what lessons could be learned. Some talked about risk management, the importance of tracking devices, trip plans, and gear. Others spoke about mental health, wondering what drives young people towards solitude. But the conversation kept returning to one theme: how fragile the line is between freedom and danger when you step beyond cell signal range. Search and rescue veterans added their voices, quietly reminding the public that wilderness is never truly tamed. Even well-marked trails can become mazes once weather changes. It's not about recklessness, one ranger wrote in a comment that circulated widely. It's about humility. The mountain doesn't care how experienced you are. For a while, the algorithms made Blake's name unavoidable. Clips of helicopter footage, still photos of Emerald Lake, timelines compiled by true crime creators, all replayed the story in loops. Yet amid the noise, a quieter movement emerged. People posting tributes not as content, but as reflection. One video simply showed the lake at sunrise with the caption, "For Blake K." No narration, just wind, water, and the steady hum of morning. The National Park Service also took notice. In September, rangers used Blake's case in an internal safety bulletin circulated to staff and volunteers. It stressed the need to educate visitors about terrain transitions, how seemingly mild meadows can lead to cliff-lined basins within minutes of hiking. The bulletin ended with a single line: "Awareness saves lives." That phrase resonated far beyond Colorado. Outdoor organizations shared it on social media. A small nonprofit in Nebraska even launched a microgrant in Blake's name to supply personal locator beacons to first-time hikers. His mother approved the gesture, but asked that it not be branded with logos or slogans. "Keep it simple," she said. "Just help someone get home." Meanwhile, journalists revisiting the story began exploring the deeper cultural pull of solitude. Why do people keep seeking silence in places that have already taken so many lives? Psychologists interviewed for these pieces spoke of threshold experiences, moments when isolation strips away distraction and reveals something elemental about being alive. For some, that revelation renews them. For others, it consumes them. Blake, they said, seemed to represent the best intention behind that impulse, the desire to reconnect, to listen. His mistake, if it could be called that, was trusting beauty not to be dangerous. The coroner's report closed the file, but the symbolic meaning of his journey refused to settle. On message boards, hikers began posting their own near misses: a slip rock, a lightning storm, a wrong turn that could have ended the same way. Each post ended with gratitude and a nod to a stranger they'd never met. "I thought of Blake today," one user wrote after surviving a fall in Utah. "It made me slow down." In that sense, his story achieved what no viral headline could. It made people pay attention. It reminded them that wilderness isn't a backdrop for photos. It's a living, unpredictable force that demands respect. The conversation drifted, as all online trends do, but traces of it lingered. Safety pamphlets updated. Local news anchors repeating the reminder before holiday weekends. Families adding emergency numbers to their itineraries. A single life, lost quietly on a summer evening, had nudged 1,000 others toward caution. Back in Omaha, autumn arrived. The memorial cairn near Emerald Lake weathered its first snow. Visitors passed it without knowing its meaning, yet occasionally someone would stop, read the name etched on a small stone tucked beneath, and fall silent for a moment. For those who searched, who grieved, who read and remembered, Blake's story became less about disappearance and more about awareness, about the delicate balance between wonder and respect. And so, in the widening archive of America's vanishing stories, his stands apart. Not a mystery to solve, but a truth to keep, that even in the safest corners of beauty, the earth still asks for humility. Winter came early to the Front Range that year. By October, the peaks of Rocky Mountain National Park were already brushed with snow. The meadows where Blake Kieckhafer had walked only months before were hushed under frost. Elk herds moved slowly through fog, their breath rising like ghosts between the pines. The tourists were gone, the gift shops closed, and the trails had fallen back into solitude. Somewhere beyond the tree line, near the ridge above Emerald Lake, the wind still whispered through the same ledges where he had taken his final steps. Nature erases footprints quickly, but it never forgets a story. For the park rangers who had searched for him, the memory remained vivid. During winter briefings, they spoke of him the way rescuers often do, not in tragedy, but in quiet respect. His name became a shorthand reminder of how quickly a day can turn, how easily distance can stretch beyond reach. In January, one of those rangers wrote a brief piece for the Rocky Mountain Journal, an internal publication few outside the service ever read. He described the search, the exhaustion, the moment the helicopter found what they had been dreading. Then he wrote one line that stayed with everyone who read it. We spend our lives looking for the lost, but sometimes what we find is our own humility. That sentiment rippled quietly through the search and rescue community. Teams across the state began sharing Blake's case in training sessions, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of why they search at all. Because every person lost is not a number. It's a heartbeat, a photograph, a family waiting for news. For Blake's mother, the months that followed were measured not by calendar days, but by memories. She returned to work eventually, speaking little about the loss. On weekends, she volunteered with a local hiking safety group, handing out maps and reminding travelers to tell someone their route. She didn't introduce herself as his mother unless someone asked. When they did, her answer was always the same. He loved the mountains. I just want others to love them safely. Grief had settled into something quieter. Not the sharp edge of disbelief, but the steady ache of absence that never quite fades. Yet even in that stillness, she found small consolations. Letters arrived from strangers who had read about Blake and decided to start hiking again, this time with more preparation. One wrote, "Your son made me pay attention. I think that's a gift." By spring 2026, the snow melted from the upper ridges. Meltwater streamed down the canyons, filling the creeks he once followed. Visitors returned to the park. At Emerald Lake, where his body had been found, a small circle of hikers paused to rest. None of them knew his story, but they felt the same pull that brought him there, the desire to see the world from a higher place, to stand in silence and feel the heartbeat of the earth. Every few weeks, a ranger hiking that route still checked the small cairn near the slope. Sometimes the stones had fallen. Sometimes someone had added one more. No plaque, no ceremony, just a quiet agreement of strangers to keep a memory intact. In time, the internet moved on. New mysteries took its place. But in a way, that forgetting was its own mercy. The people who mattered most still remembered. His story no longer belonged to algorithms. It belonged to the landscape. When the first anniversary of his death arrived, his family didn't hold a large memorial. They drove back to Estes Park, parked near the same entrance gate, and walked a short trail until the mountains came into view. His mother placed a single white stone on the ground and whispered, "We found you." The wind carried the words away, and perhaps that was enough. Because the truth at the heart of Blake Kieckhafer's story is not about loss, but connection between people and wilderness, between risk and reverence. He didn't set out to be a symbol, yet his journey reminded thousands that beauty demands respect, that peace and peril can share the same horizon. Even now, Hikers cross that same stretch of Upper Beaver Meadows unaware of the history beneath their feet. The grass moves in the breeze, the mountains rise unchanged. Somewhere above, the light catches on stone, the same glint that once drew a helicopter's eye. And if the mountain has a voice, it says nothing cruel. Only this, that life is brief, the world is vast, and in the spaces between, there is wonder worth the risk. Blake's name remains in reports, in archives, in the quiet gratitude of those who search. But beyond that, in wind, in silence, in the endless rhythm of the wild, it endures as something larger, not a mystery, not a warning, a reminder that even when the trail ends, the story does not.